have some research experience working with children and presenting my research findings at different conferences. So I wanted to get into providing a definition for what autism is. So it's a developmental disability which affects verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction. And it's generally evident before the age of 3. So most of the time, children will show signs and symptoms, and they will be able to be identified as having or being on the spectrum by the age of 3. And a great thing about that is early intervention, which provides the best outcome. And I'll talk about that later in the presentation. This is going to, somebody that has autism, it's going to impact their social skills, their communication. It will affect relationships and also their self-regulation with emotions, feelings, and behaviors. It also affects people differently and to varying degrees. So something that I really believe in is that no two people have the same type of autism. There's so many different strengths and so many different deficits that it really varies from person to person and how it affects them. Another thing is that there's no known causes for autism. So there are a lot of theories and a lot of people that are a lot of theories that have been widespread, but there actually is no scientific evidence which points to a cause of autism. And so what we're going to go over now is the levels of autism. So there's 3 different levels of autism, and I'm going to start with level 1, which is high functioning autism. So what this means is that a child or a student that has level 1 would be requiring some support, but they're still able to be independent. So they might have difficulty initiating social interactions, but that doesn't mean that they can't have any social interactions. They might have difficulty switching from activity to activity or doing that independently. And they also might have difficulty or problems with organization. So being organized in class, turning in assignments on time, taking the right books to certain classes, etc. So they're going to be requiring some support, but they're still able to be independent with most things. And level 2, so this is labeled as requiring substantial support. So here you're going to be able to see more of the deficits with social interactions. So they might not have as many friends, or they might not understand how to have a back and forth conversation. They might have inflexibility of behavior, so they might be very rigid with things. Things need to be a certain way or be completed in a certain way, or they have to go the same route to school every day. And they might be, just leading to my next point, they might have distress or have a hard time coping with those things. So if a parent takes a different route to school, they might become really upset about that. Doing something novel or being around new people might be upsetting, and they'd have trouble or difficulty coping with those emotions that come up. In level 2, you also might see repetitive behaviors, and what this can look like is walking on the toes, hand flapping. They might be really they might be really paired with like a certain toy or a specific food for lunch every day. So something that's repetitive, and you're going to see that more here. And students that are within level 2, they are requiring more support. So they're not going to be as independent with things, or they might need to go through therapy or need prompting in order to build those skills. And level 3, so this is going to be severe autism. So what we're seeing here is these students are going to be requiring very substantial support. And what this can look like is, again, we're seeing severe deficits with social interactions and communication. So sometimes students with autism, they can be nonverbal, or they can have very little expressive communication. And so with that, they're going to have a hard time expressing their wants and needs. So here, therapy would be really great just to help them build those skills or help them learn a way to communicate their wants and needs. Interactions and communication. So they're they're not really going to understand relationships very well. They're not going to understand why they need to have friends, or they're not going to understand really the difference maybe between parents and a stranger. They also might have extreme difficulty with coping with change. And so here you're going to see higher levels of behaviors. You're going to see a harder time coping with those things. So tantrums might last longer, or they might be more severe, such as, you know, maybe hitting somebody, not being able to express what they want. They become very upset with that. Another thing here, repetitive behaviors that are interfering with functioning. So in level 2, we saw some repetitive behaviors, but with level 3, it's actually interfering with them being able to function. So an example would be if a student has to, if the student needs to use the same stall in the restroom every day, or every time they need to use the restroom, and that stall isn't open, that's going to interfere with them going to the restroom. Same thing with if they need to have a blue cup to drink out of, and there isn't a blue cup where they're at, they're not going to be able to have water all day. So that's going to interfere with their functioning. So this graph illustrates the autistic spectrum, and it is a spectrum. And I think this graph really demonstrates that every student or person that is diagnosed with autism has a wide array of strengths and weaknesses, and they can all be different. And so within each of these categories of development, you can really have a, you know, somebody might be really high functioning with their physical development, and then their physical sensitivities might be very low. And so I think it just demonstrates that although somebody is diagnosed with autism, they can have many strengths, and they also can have weaknesses and there's a lot of different therapies and skills and programs to help them work on those things. And within this, within the autistic spectrum, there are 2 main categories which need to be found in order to receive a diagnosis. So those 2 categories, the first one is social communication and interaction, and the second one is restricted and repetitive behaviors. So out of those 2 categories, there's certain criteria within each of them which needs to be met in order to receive a diagnosis. And like I've mentioned a couple times, I think the first graph up on the top, the spectrum does not look like this. So even though I spoke about the different levels 1, 2, and 3, it doesn't mean that because a student is level 1, that they're going to be in the light pink area over here. And just because a student's level 3, they're going to be over here in the dark red. It's far more like the bottom picture we have down here. So like I've been mentioning, there's so many different types of strengths and weaknesses that a student with autism can have, as well as behaviors. And so it's really important to understand that and look at the whole child if and when we're receiving a diagnosis or during the diagnosis assessment. And then here I wanted to highlight the difference between a medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis. So a medical diagnosis is going to be from your physician or your medical doctor, does not automatically qualify a student or a child to qualify for special education services in school. So if there's an outside diagnosis, the school district would still have to go through the assessment process. And also in order to qualify for special education services, the behaviors and symptoms of autism would actually need to be interfering with their access to the curriculum in school. So if they're performing fine in school, maybe they can be more independent, or maybe they've worked on these skills outside of school and it's not interfering, they might not need supports and services. So we would have to go through our own assessment process to define that, see what their present levels are, what their functioning is, and how much their diagnosis of autism, if it's present, is actually interfering with them in the school setting. So now I'm going to go into the diagnostic criteria I spoke about earlier. So first, I'm going to talk about social communication and interaction. So within this category, there's 3 different subtypes or criteria that needs to be met in order to receive a diagnosis. So the first one is social emotional reciprocity. And what this is being able to have a back and forth conversation. You're able to share your thoughts, your emotions, your ideas, and you're also able to initiate and respond social interactions. So what this could look like, beginning maybe with a small child, is if the student has or the child has deficits with social emotional reciprocity, they're going to have few or no big smiles or other warm, joyful, and engaging expressions. So if you can imagine a baby, if you're smiling at them, if you're tickling their feet, they're usually going to be smiling or laughing back at you, sharing that moment. And a child that has autism might not engage in these behaviors consistently. Another thing is, just to follow along with that, is they're not going to be sharing sounds, smiles, or other facial expressions either. They might also not respond to sounds or people that are in their environment. So if there's maybe a big plane that flies by or a truck that passes by, they're not really going to draw their attention towards that or look and see what's going on in the other room. They might not also respond to nonverbal cues, such as pointing at objects in the environment. So if a parent points to something, or if there's a dog in the room, or something novel comes by the window and somebody in the room points to it, they're not going to share that attention towards whatever is new in the room. They might not also respond to interactive games, such as peekaboo, which is a common one that we play with young children. So they wouldn't really react to that. They wouldn't share that. There wouldn't be any smiling or laughing or giggling. They would just kind of be blank-faced or not really paying attention or seem bored with it. Another thing with this is within social emotional reciprocity, what it could look like is preferring to be alone. And so we'll talk about this later as well, but parallel play is something very common with children that have autism. So although there might be other children in the room, they're not interacting with those children. They prefer to be alone with their own toys. They might play next to other children, but there's no really interaction amongst them. And the second one within social communication and interaction is nonverbal communication. So this is communicating without vocal expression. You might know this, I'm doing it now, talking a lot with my hands, smiling, making eye contact. So all of these are nonverbal cues that we might do by second nature, just to show that we're listening to somebody or show that we're trying to explain something to somebody. So what a deficit in this area could look like is limited or no eye contact. And this is very common with children that have autism. From my experience, it could be some of my previous clients, it was actually physically painful because eye contact can be a very intimate thing. And so they often would not look at anybody in the eye. They would look down and away, or even though they might be listening, just turning their head and not making direct eye contact. Another thing is for smaller children, they're not going to reach up to their parent to pick them up, to be comforted, to be hugged. So they would, again, maybe prefer to be alone, or they're not looking or seeking that comfort from their guardian or parent. Following up with that is they might not cry when they have needs. So if they're hungry or they need a diaper change, they might not know to cry, to give those nonverbal cues. Hey, parent, I'm hungry, or I need a diaper change. They also might be unaware of or not be able to interpret other people's body language. So this is another common one, is they might not understand that you're smiling and clapping because they got a really good grade on an assignment. Likewise, they might not understand if your hands on your hips and you have a, maybe upset facial expression, that you might be upset at something or with them. Or if somebody else is sad, they might not understand that, if somebody's crying, that means that they're upset or they're sad about something. They might also have unusual tone of voice or body language. So an example of this is a previous client of mine would shrug his shoulders, and sometimes it was in context, but he would do it continuously throughout the day. So although they might do things like shrug shoulders or wink, they're doing it out of context, and they can't really match the behavior to something that's relevant. And the last one within this category is developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. So this is initiating social interaction again, understanding friends' feelings, being able to, initiate hanging out or even initiate getting help from the teacher and such like that. And so what this deficit in this area could look like is parallel play. So that's coming up again, is playing by themselves. Another one is not understanding friendships or relationships. So not understanding that we are social creatures and we crave connection with other human beings. They might not understand that having friends is a good thing, or maintaining relationships with teachers is a good thing, so they can understand and ask for help and feel comfortable with that. Another common one is imaginative play. So children that are diagnosed with autism do have a difficult time with imaginative play. So putting on a cape and running around pretending you're Superman, or cooking with the play kitchen and feeding somebody with fake food. They might not understand why or why that's fun, or why that could be important for play and learning and skill development. They might not be interested in making or maintaining friends or relationships. And I think this can also evolve into the later years too, maybe like into high school or after high school. Maintaining or developing romantic relationships might not be of interest to them, or they might not understand why having friends, especially like going to college and studying together, they might not understand why that would be important. And lastly, greater than usual need for time alone. And so students or children that have autism, they sometimes get overwhelmed. So a lot of times kiddos will be very, or have a lot of sensitivities around sensory things. And so being alone is more comfortable for them. They don't have to interact with people, make eye contact, be around loud noises, or have expectations put on them. So they prefer to be alone. Not all the time, but it's something that's common. And then this is going to be the second category that we're going in. So the previous category, we need to see all three of those deficits in order to have a diagnosis. And within the restricted and repetitive behaviors, there's 4 different types, and we need to see at least 2 of them to have a diagnosis of ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. So the first one is stereotyped or repetitive movements. So what this can look like is lining up toys. It can be echolalia, which is repeating things heard in their environment, or repeating a song they like, or a scene from their favorite movie. The second one within this category is insistence on sameness and inflexible adherence to routines or rituals. So what this can look like is having extreme distress at small changes. So if they have the same lunch every day and there's a cheese stick usually in that lunch and they didn't get a cheese stick that day, that can become very upsetting for them. And it can also raise a lot of emotions and feelings, and they might have a difficult time coping with that as well. They could have difficulties with transitions. So here I'm thinking of maybe stations in a classroom, going from one place to the next place. They might have a difficult time finishing and completing an activity and going on to the next, especially if the activity is preferred. They might engage in very rigid thinking patterns, so only believing that what they think is how the world is, and they can't really think from other perceptions from other people. Another example is just maybe needing to take the same route or eat the same food every day. So as I mentioned earlier, if parent goes a different route to school, that can become very distressing for them. And then the last 2 within this category, I'll go over. So highly restricted and fixated interests, which are abnormal in intensity or focus. So this is going to look like a very strong attachment or preoccupation with unusual objects, such as a specific car or a certain color toy. They might also have very perseverative interests. And so an example is a previous client of mine really loved a video game, and he had everything, all of the plush animal toys from the video game. He had t-shirts and sweatshirts and all of the actual video games to play, and any chance he got to bring up that video game and talk about it, he would, even if it was completely irrelevant. And then the second, or the last one within this category is hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. And I think this is another very common one we see with children that have autism. So this is going to look like, this can look like several different things. One of them is going to be, or possibly, an indifference to pain or temperature. So you could have a student who is very highly sensitive to pain or very insensitive to pain. So an example is, getting a small cut or falling down and scraping an elbow and they act like they broke a bone, or perhaps maybe they actually did fall and break a bone and they're not really crying at all or reacting at all. Another one can be clothing, like textures of clothing or sounds. So another previous client, they needed they would only wear long sleeve shirts, they would only wear jeans down to the ankles, they would only wear their shoes outside. Some more examples are excessive smelling or touching of objects. There could be visual fascinations with lights or certain videos that they hold really up close to their face. And then certain foods might be also within this category. So the sensitivity to certain textures of foods or certain smells of foods that they really prefer or they really don't prefer. So here we have treatment options. And so I think a really great thing about being diagnosed with autism is that it can be diagnosed by the time the child is 3. And early intervention has been shown through research that it has the best outcome. And so one of the top treatments for autism spectrum disorder is ABA therapy, which is applied behavior analysis. And I'm most familiar with this treatment option because that's before I came up to the Bay Area to go into grad school, I actually provided ABA therapy and I was a behavior therapist. And so what we did was we met with our clients for a certain number of hours and certain number of days a week, and we provided lessons through natural play. And so it wasn't very strict. We were able to, it was very child-led. We were able to do activities that the children enjoyed while incorporating lessons to increase their skill deficits. So working on those things that they needed help with, and then also managing any behaviors that they were dealing with. And there's an array of behaviors that children with autism can have. So through our play and hanging out and building a relationship with them, we're able to help them increase these skills that they needed help with, and then also help them manage any behaviors that came up. Another great one is occupational therapy. And so this would be an additional assessment on top of an autism assessment. And they would be able to receive therapy through that if needed. It's not always necessary, it's not always seen, but it's also just another option. Relationship development is another great one, just to help students identify why relationships are important, or also even at a young age to understand, hey, I need to stay with parents when I go out in public and not, go with a stranger, or know the difference between what to tell mom and dad and what to tell friends, a teacher, or a stranger. So just having them understand that. And like I've mentioned before too, just as they develop going into maybe romantic relationships or going off to college, learning that friends and peers are helpful. And it's good to maintain and have those kinds of relationships. Another one is speech therapy. So this is very common. So students that are diagnosed with autism will sometimes have speech delays or pragmatic issues. And so speech therapy can be a very great way to help with those skills and develop them. And a lot of times students will go through speech therapy and develop those skills very rapidly and be able to continue learning and developing any other skill deficits that they have. And then lastly, I have parent training. And I think this one's really, really important because you know your kid the best. And they're not always going to be at school. They're not always going to be with their therapists. And so I think it's important to be involved with the therapies that your child's in, but also understand what they're doing in therapy. So that way, when they do come home to you, or you have them on the weekends or late at night, or getting dressed and going through morning routines, you're able to also apply these practices that they're learning in other therapies at home. And you're also able to connect with your child through that. And so it's a learning experience for both of you, but I think it's really important to have those skills to generalize them at home as well as at school and in therapy. And so here I have listed some treatments and supports. And so the first one is support and resources in the Bay Area. So San Francisco Autism Society is a nonprofit, and they serve 6 different counties in the Bay Area. And what it is it's basically a society for families with children or even adults diagnosed with autism. And there's a lot of resources there. There's more education. I think they might have some virtual events. And yeah, just providing more resources and education, and then also being part of a community for just help and support. The next one is parents helping parents. So again, just having support, education, resources. This one's South Bay, so it's in San Jose, but they do have events which are hosted around the San Francisco Bay Area, and they're also hosted online. So it'd be easy to attend them. You wouldn't have to travel all the way down to San Jose. And then again, just support, education, and resources for parents and families. And then the last one on this page is the Care Parent Network. So this one was advertised as a one-stop shop kind of for family resources. And it's not only for families with children that have autism, it's for all disabilities under the umbrella. And I know also within, on this website, they have availability or resources for babysitting options for, I think, for different kinds of therapy, and then also just more support, education. I think they also might have some parent training on there. So just really great resources, some that provide virtual events, and then most all of them provide resources, education, and support for families and parents. And then this is autism and distance learning. So I think what I wanted to do here was just provide some broad tips and tricks for if you do have a student who is on the spectrum, just some things you can do at home to make distance learning easier for them. I know distance learning has been taking a toll on all of us in multiple ways. And so just a few little things here that you can rearrange the workspace, or you can just do at home in order to help your child succeed and be successful. So the first one is set a distance learning routine. And I think this is really important specifically for students with autism, just because they're very structured and they like to have a schedule, especially a visual schedule. So I have that for number 4. Having something visual so they know I'm going to be in class for these 40 minutes and then I can get a 20-minute break. And this is when lunch is. This is when I can have a snack. This is when I get a sensory break. This is when I can go on a walk. And maybe having them cross it out, whatever is comfortable or familiar to them, but having a routine that they can engage in at least during the week, it can really set them up for success. Another one is a distraction-free workspace, and I think this goes for all students, neurotypical students and students with autism. Just having a place where they can sit in and focus for a certain amount of time is really important. So not setting them in front of the big window or next to something that's loud like the kitchen. So if you can make a space that's less distracting for them so they can sit down and focus. The third one is sensory and planned breaks. So just speaking from experience here, kiddos that have autism really are sensory focused. So it just depends. I had several clients, one client who liked to sit on a spinning chair and just spin around, and he got a lot of vestibular input. One previous client liked to get on the office chair and run up and down the office with it. Another one liked to be thrown on the launch pad. Another one liked to be bounced on the yoga ball. And so just finding creative ways to get that sensory input, it can really help them calm down, help with behaviors, and then also just planning breaks. So our kiddos that have autism, they need breaks. They need to know how long they're going to work for and when they're going to be able to, just be free from work, do what they need to, maybe listen to music or watch lights on the ceiling, whatever they prefer. And then 4 visual schedules, I kind of touched on that again. Number 5, provide positive reinforcement for appropriate behaviors. So I think a great way to do this is with a token economy. And what that is, it's kind of a big word for an easy thing, is providing them small rewards for something larger. So if you have a piece of paper and they can put 5 stickers down, and once they get 5 stickers, they can have ice cream after dinner. or they can go for a walk with the dog or watch 15 minutes of the iPad. So just, and if they sit in class for 15 minutes, they can get a sticker. Or if they finish 3 problems on a worksheet, they can get a sticker. It's really up to you, but providing constant positive reinforcement for appropriate behavior works really well for kiddos on the spectrum. And then the last one I have is communicate with teachers. And I think this is really important. So all of our teachers have so much experience working with children and families in special education. And so if you have any concerns, or if you do have a student that is on the spectrum, communicating with them and letting them know, hey, like my kid needs a break, or, maybe just working on things to situate them in the classroom when we're in person. Maybe they need to be at the front of the class, or communicating with them about the length of time they're on Zoom. I think our teachers are great, and they have so much experience with that. And so communicating with them, even if you have concerns or needs for your child, would definitely be the best first route, just having open communication and then continuous communication as well. And then here are some San Leandro Unified contacts. So what I just left off on was communicating with teachers. And so if you listen to this presentation today, or even maybe before this presentation, you have concerns, or you're seeing some symptoms or signs of autism. The first line of defense would just to go to their teacher, their general education teacher. So through their teacher, they can make a referral to the school psychologist or special education team in order to start an assessment process. But speaking with them first to maybe see how they're acting in class, or maybe different things you can do, or if you are really concerned, that would be a great first point of contact in order to start a special education assessment or a special education referral. However, we do have 2 lovely people here. If you do have other concerns or want to speak to somebody, we have Lila Belli, who's our mental health program coordinator, and I have her email and her phone number there in order for you to contact her. And then also Colleen Palia, who is our director of special education, and then same, her email and phone number are there. And I do believe you guys will have the slides, so no need to hurry and write this down. So you'll have this information if you do need to contact them. And then here we have Autism Awareness Month. So this is in April. All of April is Autism Awareness Month, and April 2nd is Autism Awareness Day. So something you can do to help support and spread awareness of autism is wear blue. So that's the color that Autism Awareness kind of represents itself with. And then there's also this pin up here, which has a bunch of different puzzle pieces. And so I like this symbol because, as I was mentioning earlier, there's no 2 people with the same looking autism. And so we kind of all fit together like puzzle pieces. Each piece is different, but it creates a whole picture. So here I've listed some virtual events, and it's still about a month away until April, maybe a month and a week. So they'll probably add more things. There might be more things in our community that come up virtually, but just wanted to list a few here. So Autism Speaks is a great organization, and they have a few virtual events that are listed on their website. And then the San Francisco Autism Bay Area Community Calendar. So there's going to be various websites. I think I saw a few things up there last time I checked, and I'm sure they're going to add more as we get closer. But if you wanted to participate, show awareness, or just learn more about it, these would be a great way to start, or just even to look at them. And then, yeah, just wear blue and support autism awareness in the month of April. And then here's just a few more resources. So autismspeaks.org is a really great research-based educational platform. It's going to have a lot of the information I spoke about today, probably in a little more detail. And then we have Regional Center East Bay, which is a great community resource for having assessments completed if you're concerned at a really young age. And I think they also provide supports. So they provide supports from 0 to 3, and then after 3 years old as well, depending upon the disability. They also have certain therapies that you can enroll in or participate in. And I believe they also have parent training and certain things like that as well. And then number 3 is a milestone checklist. So I have that on a Google Drive. And what that is it provides a checklist for children ages 0 to 5 years old about skills that you should be seeing with your student around that age. So for example, it'll list ages 9 to 12 months. And there will be a list of skills that a healthy 9 to 12 month old which should be exhibiting. So I think it's a great way just to check in about those milestone developments, seeing if they're sitting up on their own at the right age. And if not, maybe asking your pediatrician or your doctor or letting them know about any delays that you might be seeing. And then the last one here is the National Institute of Mental Health. So it's an autism spectrum disorder pamphlet. And again, just providing some more resources and education. It has a lot of the information we spoke about today. And then it's just a little bit easier to read, not too long or not too detailed. So just another way to learn more and be educated. And that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or speak, or if anybody in the audience has a student diagnosed with autism, if you could share any tips or tricks that have been working with distance learning or any comments or experiences you're happy to share, I'm happy to discuss them and then answer any questions as well.
Taylor, thank you so much. There are a lot of comments and questions in the chat. Also a couple requests. I think so much information was shared. So there might be questions to just ask for some repetition because there was so much information shared. But I'm going to go through the chat and just name some of the comments and questions so that you can respond to them.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
One person shared that their child does attend ABA therapy every day and it helps him so much. And so it seems like that was really beneficial. Another parent mentioned that their son is 13, almost 14, and they're asking for resources for relationship development at this age. They shared that he is blowing up all of his friendships right now.
I mean, for that, I think there was just within the PowerPoint, a lot of different resources. And I talked a lot about early intervention and diagnosing at an early age, but a lot of the resources that I provided do give support, education, and then possibly maybe even like relationship therapy. I don't know specifics about that, but I would definitely check out I think it was like the CARE.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I am a clinical psychologist who specializes in autism, and I work at Regional Center of the East Bay. So with regard to that question with peer support and not blowing up your friendships, there is a peers curriculum, PEERS. It's an evidence-based curriculum to address social engagement and social supports. It started in UCLA, and in fact, right now is the perfect time to be involved and to look it up because everything is being run via Zoom. And so you could actually participate in a Zoom peers group that's being run out of UCLA with the founders of the program. So I would definitely encourage you to look that up.
Thank you. And if you can even drop that resource in the chat, even just the name that you mentioned, I think that would be helpful to family members that are looking for the resource. We had another attendee share that Family Resource Navigators is our local family resource center. So that might be helpful for people who are looking for more additional resources. Jeanette had her hand raised and had shared a little bit about her son, but some of what is challenging right now. Jeanette, actually, do you want to go ahead and unmute? I think you had a question in here.
Yes. Thank you.
Older.
So I have a senior in high school, and he was doing amazing developmentally when he was in school. I didn't feel very anxious because I felt that with his goals and accommodations, he was able to successfully move um, I don't know what it's called, you know, when they're in classes, and now he's in AP and honors classes. So he's doing phenomenal. But since he has been in distance learning, I've noticed that his he's not talking to anybody, he's not socializing when he's in and I understand that a lot of teenagers are like this, but I worry specifically for him because of his autism, because he was originally diagnosed with nonverbal. He has become very isolated, very like he won't talk during the breakout rooms. When he's in peer groups, if they have a peer project, he does his work on his own, he turns it in and he moves on. I worry because he's a senior, so he is losing the certain developmental things that a 17-year-old boy would or child would get before he moves on to college. And I'm worried. I'm really honestly worried. I have talked to admin, I've talked to school psychologists that I'm worried. I'm worried. He's going to college, and you know, if he needs, you know, these social skills that he was learning are disappearing, and I'm worried.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm wondering if the link that Carrie sent with the peers, I don't know if you'd be interested in that. I personally haven't checked it out, but it sounds like it might be beneficial for building those skills or even initiating that. I don't know if you'd be interested in participating. But yeah, I think it's a tough time, and especially for a student that was previously diagnosed nonverbal.
Is the peers curriculum, is that the thing where you are with another college student? Is that the one that is, I'm sorry, maybe I missed that about the peers
That's okay.
curriculum.
I'm wondering if Carrie would be able to speak more on that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So peers stands for something, and I honestly, at this moment, I wasn't expecting to say anything. So I can't remember what it stands for, but the idea behind the curriculum is introducing ecologically valid interventions to youth. So an example for that might be adults, we sometimes give really bad advice to our teenagers. If someone's being mean to us, we say, go tell a teacher. Well, teenagers don't typically go tell a teacher. And in fact, when they do, they tend to get ridiculed. So what are ways that they could address this challenge that doesn't get them ridiculed, but that keeps them safe and keeps them connected to peers who are safe rather than being socially ostracized? So the goal of this curriculum and the peers program is really, how do we address some of those things that aren't explicit, that you can't really explicitly teach them. You can't make it very obvious or clear when you're teaching them. But most of us learn through watching the environment around us. So that is the focus of the peers curriculum, but it's for people who want to participate. So if you have a young person who is more and more withdrawn, who doesn't want to participate, who is sort of struggling to engage with other people, that's a different problem. That's not necessarily because they don't know how. That would suggest that there's more going on with that person. And you might want to seek some support related to social support groups, or even talking about getting some mental health support with someone who might professionally be able to help just assess if there's more happening with this individual.
I do want to add as well, and one of our family members that's here mentioned it, is you all received a message from our superintendent, Dr. McLaughlin, earlier today, that there are small cohorts that could be coming back very soon in a couple of weeks. And so it may be worthwhile at this point to reach out to your administrator again to find out what are the plans for reopening. And if you believe that your child would benefit from being able to attend in person, whether they would be able to do so in the ways that they are opening up sites to allow very small groups of students to come back. Taylor, there's a couple other questions here, specifically around, let me see if I can find it again. There was a question about kindergarten. One parent asked about if San Leandro has similar programs to provide children with ASD to learn and play with peers when we are in school. And then also asking a question, and maybe Colleen can speak to this, is if students are diagnosed with autism, can you delay the year that they go to kindergarten? Can they go to kindergarten after they are 6 years old?
The latter question might be best answered by Colleen. The first one, so there's several different programs if the student's eligible going into, so depending upon when they get assessed, we have several different preschool programs, which they can be involved with special day classes. So they would be in a class with other peers who are not yet neurotypical. So they would be in like a mild moderate preschool class or a moderate severe preschool class, which has more or less students depending upon the severity of the disabilities. And then there's also a transitional kindergarten, which they can go into, which would still provide support and services with other students who are in special education. And then also kindergarten classes, and then going from kindergarten up until 12th grade. We have resource classes, which would provide the students support and help in the general education classroom. We have mild moderate classes, which would be have more support with students that are also in special education with paraprofessionals, and then moderate severe classes, which is usually a less amount of students with more paraprofessional help. So it really just depends on what the team believes that the student needs, and then the severity of the disability from whatever assessments that they get that are completed.
There's another question here. A parent has a son in transitional kindergarten. She says he gets about 23 hours of ABA a week. He has mild autism. Should she prioritize schoolwork over ABA hours, meaning more schoolwork and less ABA?
I think that's really up to the team. So from my experience, when I was doing ABA, it was natural play ABA. So it was very child-led. I incorporated lessons and behavior management with whatever activities we were doing. And some of those activities were schoolwork. So I worked with 16-year-olds, I worked with 10-year-olds, I worked with a 5-year-old who just started kindergarten. And we were able to do some of their homework that was assigned during the ABA lesson or during the ABA session rather. And you know, I don't think somebody in maybe grade school isn't getting a bunch of hours of homework. And I'm not sure if the ABA company you're with allows that, but from my experience and working with the ABA company I did, we were able to incorporate homework time. So we worked on sustained attention, we worked on self-advocacy, asking for help. We worked on planning, so executive functioning skills. So homework can be actually a really great way to increase any deficits that you're seeing for your kiddo that has autism, in my opinion.
Thank you. And I see Colleen is unmuted. It sounds like you want to speak to some of these points.
A lot of these are very specific student-centered, and I see a lot of good questions up here. And if there are, I think that it would probably be more beneficial if you want specific questions answered that you email me privately, because I see one from Daniel Garcia about concerns about a student, and those are good for us to see and hear here. But I'd like to do that on a one-to-one basis with parents and connect them with the proper people to get these questions answered, because I don't feel like I have all the information in front of me to give an answer to the whole group. I do see lots of questions about which students are returning and who's in what group, and that's very site specific. And those are questions you need to direct to your site administrators. First off, is parent comfortable having a student return in person? And then we have teachers who will be volunteering to do some in-person, and it's all being done site specific, which is, I'm kind of reiterating what Celine said earlier. But it's not like this particular group is coming back as opposed to another group. We're trying to get the feedback and dialogue going with parents, and it's all pretty site specific. So for those, please reach out to your site administrators. About the ABA therapy, some asked, can you receive ABA therapy services through an IEP? The answer is it's going to depend on your student needs. Usually our district behaviorists get involved at that point to do assessments and make determinations on what type of services the student might require within the school setting. And then in addition, you've been talking about your outside ABA services in the home setting. And sometimes too much is too much for kids, right? Too much ABA therapy can be tiring and saturating for students who are actually in school as well. So there's sometimes balances, and it goes back to your IEP team trying to make, working together and looking at the whole child and trying to make the best offer through the IEP. And so for those of you that have specific questions, I really encourage you to you can email me. I think, is my email's up there, right?
It is,
Then,
yes.
yeah, and then I can, especially the couple at the high school about the socialization piece, those are important components I'd like to see how we could address. I'd be curious to see what this peers is like. So I hope that helps. I just don't want to give you misinformation if I don't have the whole picture of the student. But I'm more than happy to connect with you and then connect you with whoever it is we can have help support you with those specific concerns. And thank you for sharing them. It's good to see this.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Yes, please, you can take Colleen's email address from the screen. And Colleen, if you can just put it one more time in the chat so people can copy it as well. And then she can answer your questions or make sure they get directed to the right place to try to support you and your student as well as possible during these times, which we're seeing in the chat have made it so much harder for our students. We want to thank Taylor and all of you. Taylor, thank you for sharing this important information. Thank all of you for asking really important questions and pushing the conversation forward. We will, again, share the slides as well as a recording of the session so that you can come back and revisit. They'll be posted on our Family Learning Series website at sluusd.us. So thank you, good night, take care, and we hope to see you next week at our next event.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.